Hello, and thank you for joining us today on your Sage Intacct product demonstration. My name is Melissa Powell with LBMC Technology Solutions, your Sage Intacct implementation partner. We're excited today to show you the Sage Intacct product. But first, let's talk a little bit about your dedicated LBMC implementation team. You will be given a dedicated project manager during your implementation. This project manager will be assigned to go ahead and design a project plan. The project plan will lay out your go-live target date and other dates that we will need to meet during the project to keep all of us on track during our implementation. You will also have a Sage Intacct implementation consultant. One other thing that sets us apart at LBMC is all of our implementation consultants are former accountants. So they have been in your shoes. They can talk your language. They know the goals you're trying to accomplish. And we have found in doing this that this really creates for a smooth implementation process. Also, at LBMC, we have done over 500 implementations of Sage Intacct, and a quarter of those have been in the healthcare space. So we're excited to talk about your project today and go ahead and show you a little bit of the product. So let's go ahead and jump into the demonstration. I've logged in today as the controller and landed on my controller dashboards. The goal of Sage Intacct is to make dashboards that goes beyond your typical balance sheet and P&L and your normal debits and credits, and to instead look at information in one place and in a format that is meaningful to you. As I log into my dashboard today, I am at what is called the top level. The top level is an automatic roll-up or consolidation of all of the entities in our environment. This right here is a multi-entity environment with 5 different entities, and the top level is a roll-up of all of those entities together. Now on a dashboard, I can drill down or narrow down by a specific entity or an entity group as well. So if I want to see data just for a specific entity, I can filter and apply those filters, and my data is going to change for that entity specifically. Now, as we are looking at our consolidated view, we can see that there's several elements to this dashboard. The first element is these performance cards up here at the top. Performance cards are what I like to call quick business insights. These might be any type of information that is important for you to be able to look at visually and address. We can see here that we have red visual indicators to draw our eye towards things we might need to look at. For example, our G&A expenses that are up as compared to the prior period. From the dashboard, I can even drill down to the information to see what's making up these G&A expenses. I can see here that I have a couple of categories that are higher than the previous month. And if I want to actually take a look, I can continue to drill down into the information. I can see that we have some expense reports here that were submitted. And again, as I continue to drill down into the information, I can actually get all the way to the source transaction, which is the original expense report that was submitted and that was approved. The great thing about the drill down capabilities in Intacct is that this can be done by an employee user. There's 2 types of users in Intacct. There are business users who do things that affect the GL, typically your accounting staff, and there are employee users that are typically used for retrieving information. So as an employee user, I can have access to these dashboards, all the information on these dashboards, and be able to drill down into the source transactions. In addition to performance cards, I can also have reports with visual indicators. So reports that are important to me, such as a profit and loss, actual versus budget. With my budget variance, we have specific thresholds that are set to give us visual indicators, such as red, when we are over a certain amount of our variance. You could also have things like an expense report by department. This report right here is narrowing down just on our expense GL accounts and then creating a column for each department. And again, those visual indicators with conditional formatting help draw our eye to things we might need to address. In addition to reports, we can also have graphs and charts, such as this cash balance trend right here. Each of our checking accounts is a different color on this trend report, and we can see, of course, our cash balance trend as we go through the different months of the year. You might also have different things that are important to you, such as this expenditures, budget versus actual, and commitments. So in this environment, we do have a purchase order processing in place. So you can see here that our professional fees expense budget was $216,000 for the year. Our actuals has already went over, plus we have $500 committed either through a purchase requisition or PO. So this is money that we already know is going to be spent, giving us a total remaining budget overage of $66,641.26. You can also have things such as financial ratios that might be important to you on your dashboard, as well as other reports like this employee benefits allocated. We can see right here, this takes our employee benefits and our salaries and wages, gives us the amount before allocations, and then we can see after the allocations that it is allocating those benefits and those employee salaries and wages across our different departments that are indicated up here in the columns. If we are in charge of approving employee expenses or purchase transactions, we can have this on our dashboard as well. And if we had things to approve, it would look very similar to this, showing us certain employee expense reports that we have approved and for the amount, and certain purchase requests that we have to approve as well. Now, my controller dashboard was what I call a role-based dashboard. You can also have other dashboards for anything else that might be helpful, such as this month-end close dashboard. This month-end close dashboard shows us how we're doing on our revenue, expenses, AR, AP, cash balance, and our performance cards, as well as indicates our month-end close checklist, has a close-through summary showing us all of our subledgers and the last time that the books were closed for those subledgers, has custom navigation to get to specific areas in Intacct that would be important as you're running month-end close, also has report shortcuts, again, reports that are typically run during your month-end close. Now, you might also have outcome-based dashboards. This dashboard right here shows us our physician metrics. We can see here that this is displaying our revenue as compared to prior year, as well as our number of treatments, our number of physicians, and some calculations of our revenue against number of treatments and our physicians. This information right here, such as number of treatments and number of physicians, is what is called statistical data in Intacct. So in Intacct, we can not only just track our financial information, but we can track any other counts of information that is important to us, such as number of treatments or number of physicians. We can bring those in through a statistical type of entry, or we can integrate those from your outside systems. Once that statistical data is in Intacct, then we can use that to do calculations, such as revenue per treatment or revenue per physician. This outcome-based dashboard also has a profit and loss by location, which is our different physician health centers. So we can, of course, easily see how each center is doing compared to another one. We can also have graphs and charts that might display something like payer mix, how they're paying through private insurance, private pay, or public insurance. Again, all of this information is drillable. And even statistical charts for our statistical information, such as patient visits, and patient visits broken out by new, existing, and our total. Now you may be wondering, well, that all looks great, but how do you actually get the information in there to produce those dashboards and reports? Well, first is through the structure of Intacct. So within our structure, we have a couple of elements. That would be one, your chart of accounts and your dimensions. Now, as you go through implementation, your implementation consultant will help you design your chart of accounts and your dimensions according to your reporting outputs. Our chart of accounts is going to show basic GL accounts, our natural GL account number, meaning an asset, liability, revenue, or expense. Now, if we look at the setup of an expense account specifically, we can see that within our setup, of course, we're going to have a GL account number and a name. The category, which is kind of a roll-up on your reporting. Of course, will indicate whether this GL account is a balance sheet or income statement type of account, whether its normal balance is a debit or credit, and whether it's a closing account or non-closing account. And of course, for our revenue and expense accounts that close, what account they close into. Now, in addition to this basic information, we also have this section down at the bottom that says required dimensions. This required dimensions is important because this is what helps us structure our reporting output. So if we need to produce a departmental P&L, we would want to make sure that this department is checkmarked as a required dimensions on all of our revenue and expense accounts. Same for things like location, provider, customer or payer. Any other thing that we would want to produce a profit and loss report for, we would need to make sure that those are required dimensions. Now, within the dimension structure, there's several different dimensions in Intacct. One, of course, is just your entity. So again, we have multiple entities in this environment. So we can transact as what is called the top level, which is the roll-up or consolidation of all the entities. Or, of course, we can transact in just one entity specifically. Now you can see that I did not have to log out and log in to get into just this entity. All I did was drill down into that entity and it opened in a separate tab. I can have multiple entities open at once in multiple tabs without logging out and logging back in. So right now I'm at the top level, as well as Union Health in this tab and Accord Health in this tab. Now, in addition to your entities, you also have locations. Locations are basically a parent-child relationship to the entities. So we can see here that we have Springfield and Riverside under Accord Health. And under Union Health, we have Fairfield and Dover. So with the use of this location dimension, we have the ability to pull a balance sheet or profit and loss by Dover and see just the numbers specifically for this location. Now, if I pull the balance sheet or income statement by Union Health, that is going to combine both of these locations together. In addition to location, you also have the department dimension. The department dimension is typically used for departmental tracking as well as for approval routing workflows. You can see over here that we have managers indicated on these departments, which means that if we set up something like an employee expense approval or AP bill approval by a department manager, then if somebody codes that expense report or that AP bill to post-operative care, then the system is going to know to route that to Catherine for approval. Now, within the departments, you can also set up parent-child relationships if need be, and these can have up to 6 levels of parent-child relationships. You also have what is called the class dimension. The class dimension is kind of a free-for-all, so typically people will rename this to whatever they're tracking by, and for a lot of healthcare, provider is pretty commonly used here. So again, you can have names of providers here in your class dimension, and then we can code transactions to those providers, which again gives us our reporting outputs on our reports and dashboards. You also have other dimensions such as customers or payers, vendors, employees, and with additional modules, you might have dimensions such as item, project, task, or warehouse. Now the structure, again, of the chart of accounts and the dimensions is what gives us our reporting output. Now, as we move on from the structure, one of the aspects of Sage Intacct that is really important is the multi-entity aspect. The multi-entity aspect has several elements to it, including the setup and structure, the workflow of transactions, and reconciling through reporting your inter-entity due-tos and due-froms. Within Sage Intacct's multi-entity environment, there is setup for our inter-entity account mapping. So within this multi-entity environment, we will be able to map how you would like your inter-entity receivables and payables to be processed. There's 2 methods within your inter-entity account mapping. There is one that is the advanced method, which you see here, which is a 4-account method, meaning 4 GL accounts for each combination of entities, or there is a basic mapping as well, which is just 2 GL accounts, 1 receivable and 1 payable per entity combination. During your implementation, you will discuss with your consultant which mapping plan is best for you. Once the mapping plan is set up, then Sage Intacct will automatically do your inter-entity transactions for you. Now, there's a few ways that Sage Intacct accomplishes inter-entity transactions. The first way is through a standard journal entry. So let's take a look at our example right here of an inter-entity journal entry. This journal entry right here has our debits and credits, and as you can see, these debits and credits are hitting different entities. We have 3,000 hitting 100, 7,000 hitting 100, and 4,000 hitting 200. Now, of course, 100 to 100 is not going to create any type of inter-entity because that is the same entity, but 100 to 200 is going to create inter-entity. So in posting this journal entry, this is the part that the accountant would fill out up here, and then they would go ahead and post this. After they post this entry, Intacct would automatically do the below. So you can see here that we have our due tos and our due froms for that $4,000 transaction, since that does cross entities. The second way that Sage Intacct handles inter-entity automatically for you would be through the use of a cross-coded accounts payable bill. So I have an accounts payable bill pulled up here. We can see here that this is for the vendor. We've got the date, the vendor number, all of our basic header information. But we can see down here in the coding that this is all coded to repairs and maintenance, but there were certain amounts that coordinated to certain entities. So this AP bill is actually touching 4 entities in its entirety. In its entirety, it's for $4,500. How this works is that $1,500 would be posted to the accounts payable ledger for entity 100. $1,200 would be posted to the accounts payable ledger for 200, and so on and so on. So if I pull an aging at 100 for this vendor, I will only see the $1,500 amount, and so on. Where the inter-entity transaction happens is when the bill is paid. So each checking account in Intacct is attached to an entity because we know when you go set up a checking account, they ask for an EIN, correct? So the checking accounts in Intacct, like this one, for example, this 100 SBB right here, you can see this is attached to entity 100. So when I go to pay this AP bill, if I pay it with this checking account attached to entity 100, that means that this 1,500 would not create any inter-entity accounts because it would be 100 to 100. But for the 1,200, the 1,000, and the 800, there would be inter-entity due tos and due froms now created automatically because now each of these entities owes entity 100 money because entity 100 paid upon their behalf the whole $4,500 bill. Now within the GL account itself, it is very important within your due to and due from GL accounts to go ahead and ensure that this disallow direct posting is checked. What this means is that nobody can directly post journal entries into our due from or due to accounts. And this is because if Sage Intacct is doing all intercompany transactions automatically, then ideally it should balance and we shouldn't need anybody posting into those accounts. Sage Intacct also can give you inter-entity reconciliation reports to ensure that your inter-entity transactions are in balance. So if we look here, we can see each entity has its own column and the total column over here to the right. Ideally, if we look at this very bottom right-hand corner, we should see 0 in this corner amount right here. This means that everything balances out correctly. If there was not a 0 here, then something would be off. But as you can see, we can see here that Accord Health actually has due tos coming in. Partners Health actually has due froms that it needs to pay out. So we can easily and quickly see here who needs to go ahead and transfer money between whom in order to clear out or reconcile our inter-entity transactions. Not only is Sage Intacct a multi-entity system, it is a multi-journal system as well. We can see in our general ledger setup, the Sage Intacct has multiple sub-ledger journals. These sub-ledger journals, such as your accounts payable, accounts receivable, cash disbursements, and other optional journals, all flow in to your general ledger. Within the general ledger system, we can, of course, create standard journal entries. The journal entries can be coded to our accrual books, have a description, include reference numbers, posting dates, and of course, any attachments that might be needed as well. Within the line level area of the journal entry, we can code to our different locations or entities, as well as the different GL accounts that we might be hitting, as well as other dimensions that might be important for this journal entry, such as department or our class dimension, which we are using in here as provider. Also, within the journal entry, you have the availability to have what is called transaction allocations. You'll see if I select this transaction allocation, that this will actually gray out my location field over here. And that is because this allocation is set up with locations already split out. Within our general ledger area, we can set up these transaction allocations, and then we can use those in transactions, as you just saw. We can see that this transaction allocation is allocating by a percentage. It is taking 25% across 4 different locations or entities, totaling our 100% of the line. When we select that allocation on the line, it is going to use that setup to go ahead and conduct the splits according to that transaction allocation. As we expand this line, we can see below the 4 entities that this amount at the line level is being split by evenly into the 25%, as you saw in the setup of the allocation itself. You can set up as many transaction allocations as you need. They are then available in this screen right here to select, and you can select these in any types of transactions, journal entries, AP bills, AR invoices, and other types of transactions available in Sage Intacct. Now, also within the system, you also have reoccurring journal entries. Reoccurring journal entries can be handy if you are ever posting entries at the end of the month that are the same. Our reoccurring journal entry is really the same layout as a standard journal entry with standard header information. We will select which journal it's actually going to post to, so you can have this flow into the GL or into any other journal in the system that you would like it to flow into. You can include attachments, and then, of course, create your coding as you saw in the previous journal entry. The main difference is that this recurring journal entry has a tab to create a schedule. Within the schedule, we can tell the journal entry when to start. We can tell it when to end, never, a number of occurrences, or a specific date. And we can say how we want it to repeat, days, weeks, months, or years. If we choose month, we can say post every 1 month, and we can check this box to have it post at the end of the month, meaning it will post on the last day of the month. We can also have this automatically reverse the journal entry out if we would like to, and link the original journal entry or create an independent reversing journal entry. You also have a spot for an email right here, and this email would send a notification to a person of this reoccurring journal entry. Other functionalities within the General Ledger module include statistical accounts. So not only does the General Ledger house our chart of accounts, it also houses any statistical accounts that we might want to create. Statistical accounts are used for non-financial data and then can be used in your reporting and dashboards. You can see here that this environment has several types of statistical accounts set up. When you're creating a statistical account, and we'll look at employee headcount as an example, you do have options similar to your GL accounts. So for this report type, this can be a cumulative type of balance or for the period type of balance. Typically for headcount, people will set this up as a cumulative type of statistical account, meaning we are going to give it a starting balance, and then we can do entries to either increase or decrease that balance of employee headcount. If you want something that counts for a specific period, such as bed count or patient count, and you want to enter that exact count every period, that would be a for the period type of account. We can also require dimensions, just like we can on our GL accounts, on statistical accounts. So again, if we want to use these in reporting or computations, and we know we're going to pull a P&L by department, and then we're going to use employee headcount against those expense accounts, we might want to ensure that department is a required dimension on our employee headcount. Now, once our statistical accounts are set up, we can do what is called a statistical journal entry. A statistical journal entry is not a balancing type of journal entry, but it's an increase or decrease. You can see here in our employee headcount example, this is our initial load of our employee headcount. So we can see here, since this is a cumulative account, we have employees split out by department and split out by location, and their starting counts here with a total of 20 employees altogether. From there, we can go ahead and create a statistical type of entry anytime a change happens in that employee headcount. So if I look at this one, I can see that there was an increase in employee headcount to this specific location and for this specific employee. If a decrease happens in employee headcount, we can, of course, adjust our journal entry to have the decrease in headcount. So at this point, that means I currently have 21 employees total. Within the general ledger, you also have other types of entries that can be helpful, such as our adjusting entries. Adjusting entries are, of course, permission-based, but these can be entries that are done outside of our month-end close when we close the books. These entries often come from quarterly compilations or auditing entries, and these entries that are entered show in a separate section of our trial balance. When we run our trial balance report, we can see that there's our standard opening balance, our regular debits and credits that are flowing through our accrual books, and then here's our adjusting debits and credits. These are the entries that would come through that adjusting journal, which would then show us our closing balance. You can also have other types of entries, such as GAAP adjusting entries, tax adjusting entries, and user-defined books, recurring statistical entries, and statistical adjusting entries. Also within General Ledger, this is where we would close the books. We would select an entity that we want to close and select the period we are closing for and click Close the Books. This would lock down the entire ledger, including all the subledgers as well. You do have the availability to open the books back up, and you can open the books by subledger specifically. So again, we would pick the entity and pick the period, but if we just wanted to open a subledger, we could be specific and just open the accounts payable subledger and make any adjustments that we need to make. Once those adjustments in the accounts payable subledger are made, we can then just close the books all over again to lock everything down. There's also other aspects in the general ledger area, such as budgets, financial reporting, but we'll get into those towards the end of the demonstration. Within the accounts payable subledger of Sage Intacct, we can do activities such as entering vendors, entering AP bills, approving bills if applicable, paying bills, printing checks, and much more. Within the vendor record of accounts payable, we can see here that this is our vendor listing. A vendor listing can have a multitude of views, which we will look at in a moment. A view consists of columns that state information. Within the vendor itself, there are several attributes available when setting up a vendor. Within the vendor record, we can see that our vendor ID numbers in this instance are being auto-numbered. The system gives you options to choose auto-numbering or to identify the custom ID for your vendor. You will also indicate the vendor name. Vendors can be active non-posting for parent type of vendors, or inactive. You also can indicate a vendor for one-time use, meaning once this vendor goes through the cycle of entering a bill and paying it, it will automatically become inactive. On our primary contact record within the AP bill, we can list contact information such as first name, last name, print as, address, primary email, and even secondary email. You can also indicate a vendor is an individual person and include URLs. There's several additional tabs to include additional information on the vendor record. Within the Additional Information tab, we can indicate vendors by type. The vendor type is a custom field. You decide what options are available for vendor type. Once vendors are assigned a type, this can then be used for filtering and reporting capabilities. We can also indicate parent-child relationships, 1099 information such as tax ID, 1099 name, form and box type, as well as our W-9 attachments is available as well. In our billing details, you can also see that we can default an expense account to help with data entry, meaning anytime we enter an AP bill for BioWash, our line level of the AP bill will automatically default to medical supplies. We can also enter credit limits for a vendor. We can place a vendor on hold or place a vendor on do not pay. Within the contact list, you can also indicate pay to contacts, return to contacts, and separate 1099 contacts. You can see here that this vendor has a few different contact cards. There's a BioWash Regional South and a BioWash Regional North. And we can see that our pay to contact, where we normally pay the vendor, is defaulted to our Regional North office. Within payment information, we can select the preferred payment method for this vendor, which will help in our pay bill screen. Check, credit card, record transfer, which is typically for ACH or wire pulls, cash, or ACH bank file, which means that the system would generate the match file that we could then upload to our bank and pay our vendors. We can default the payment priority, normal, high, urgent, or low, as well as terms. Again, your terms are custom made, and then this will help in data entry because when we select this vendor and enter our bill date, it will automatically populate the due date based upon the terms that are defaulted on this vendor. You can also include vendor account numbers. So if account numbers need to be actually put on a check, then we can go ahead and indicate that account number here and it will print on the check. You also have other tabs up here that are indicated for different functionality in Intacct, and these tabs are only enabled if additional functionality is enabled. Now within the vendor list screen, as you saw, I can filter by any of these fields up here or leave my filters open. I can also create, as I mentioned, different list views, meaning different column orders or information to display. All of the information that you just saw on the vendor record can be displayed in a column. Some additional types of views here that have been previously set up is a 1099 information check. So this is giving us the vendor name, the vendor type, the tax ID. We can see if this box is checked as an individual person. We can see that that 1099 name here is different. It's the individual person's name versus the company's DBA name. We can see that their form and box type is filled out, as well as their address. We can also see that we don't have an email address for any of these, and there are several vendor records in the system that have a tax ID but do not have the 1099 form and box types filled out. So we can use this view as a check in order to ensure towards the end of the year that we have all of our 1099 information entered into the system. You can also have other views such as an AP manager view. This one right here shows us our vendor and the terms of the vendor and their total due. The top spending vendors view goes ahead and narrows this list down by our vendor name and the top spending vendors over here, their vendor type and their total amount due. So as you can see, different views can be set up to give you different information in the list screen of your vendors. When entering AP bills within Sage Intacct, we can see that there are bills in a state of posted, submitted, and paid. In the system, we currently have AP bills set up for approval. So that means anytime we are entering an AP bill, it needs to be routed for approval first. Once approval is processed, the bill will then switch to a state of posted, and once the bill is paid, the bill will then switch to a state of paid. Now, when entering bills and accounts payable, you have a couple of options. There's the option to enter a bill from scratch and type all the information in manually. There's an option to use OCR scanning capabilities to pre-populate fields in a bill. And there's also the option to import AP bills. Together, we'll look at those options each individually. So if I want to just add a bill from scratch, I would click the Add button, and that would bring me into the AP bill entry screen. The AP bill entry screen is first going to ask me for header type of information, which might include the transaction date. It will default the GL posting date to the transaction date that I enter, but I can obviously adjust that GL posting date if I need it to post in a prior or future period. I would, of course, select the vendor, and I can always do that by starting to type in the name of the vendor, and the vendor will come up. Or I can, of course, just use the entire vendor listing to find my vendor as well. So if I want to start typing in, I'll use this Boston one here. I can, of course, select that. That populates my pay to and my return to from the vendor record. If a vendor has different pay to or return to options, you can toggle between those to adjust who the pay to is, and that will adjust the pay to person, contact, and address, as you can see. You will, of course, enter the bill number as well. Any reference or PO numbers that you might have, any descriptions that you would like to put. My terms will default if that term is defaulted on the vendor record, as we saw previously, which will then default my due date below. If I do not have the term set, I can, of course, key in the due date. I can enter a recommended pay on date if I have that date. I can add attachments if I need to. And, of course, I can set a payment priority, and I can use this in my pay bill screen. Then, of course, I would move on to actually coding the bill. So if I want to go ahead and code the bill to a certain location, a certain department, item, if I need item, we don't have to fill in that though if it is not required. GL account will default, again, if that is defaulted on the vendor record. If not, I would have to populate this field. And of course, my class dimension if I am using that. Then I can put the amount of the bill and move on to another line if needed. You do have the option in Intacct to create what is called transaction allocations. Transaction allocations define a certain static allocated amount by amount or percentage across multiple dimensions. For example, if I pick this allocation by entity, you'll notice that the system grayed out the entity or the location dimension right here, and that is because the allocation itself defines how the amount that I select should be split between locations. So I'm going to click this Show Details so we can see what the allocation did. And as I look at this table down here, I can see that the allocation took my $150,000 on the line, which is my total up here, and it went ahead and split it out by my different locations, 25% each. So this is defined in the setup of the allocation, and if we want to look at the setup of that, we can very quickly. But once these are set up, these can be used in any type of transaction. And that is why it is called a transaction allocation. So if I look here, this one is allocate by percent, and as you can see, it takes those 4 locations that are indicated, and it's only using that location dimension, but you could use other dimensions such as department or provider as well, and you do those splits accordingly. And it's taking that and it's splitting each of them 25% across the 4 to give me my 100% for the line. So that is exactly what we see happening here in this table below. So transaction allocations can be set up and used within transactions to streamline some of our allocations across our dimensions. Now, once this bill is populated, of course, I can go ahead and I have options to submit. Your options will be submit or post. Submit would be if you have approval set up, which we do in this environment. If you do not have AP bill approvals, your button will just be to post. You also have the option to draft. So let's say somebody is, filling this out and they're not sure, maybe on the department coding or maybe another dimension coding or how something should be split up. They could always draft this and then come back in and look at this bill. So if we draft this, it just puts it in a draft state. And then, of course, we can come back in, grab that bill, fill out our appropriate coding, however we wanted to do that, and then go ahead and submit that when we're ready. Okay. Now that's an example of an error message, and that is because I just overrode the allocation with the location dimension. So anytime there is an error, the system is going to give you an error message, and it's going to let you know what you did incorrectly. So that is always helpful as well. So let's look at the other 2 options. So that is just entering a bill from scratch. Now, I mentioned there is an option for import as well, so we'll cover that one next. Everything in Intacct does have import templates. In the company area of the system, there is an area called import data. And as long as you are at least, I think, a limited admin, you'll have access to this. So it has all the templates that you would need to import any type of data. So if we're looking at something like accounts payable bills right here, there's the template. They're all Excel-based templates, and then here's the place where I would import it. So if we look at that template, it's basically, the same thing you saw on entering a bill. It's just horizontal across, right? So if I look at this, I have things like a bill number, my vendor ID, the date I created it, the date this bill is due, however many lines I have on that bill. So this one has 3 lines. The GL accounts it's coded to, the dollar amounts it's for, and then my dimension splits. So this one has all the same location, all the same department, and then different item SKUs that they're coding those amounts across to. So you could, of course, have multiple AP bills on this template in this format with multiple line items, as you can see. And then you can import those all at once. And when you import those, of course, it's going to go ahead and it's going to drop the bills into this bill listing screen right here that you have imported. So that is another option as well. And then the third option, which is a release from Intacct. This is an additional type of service that is available in Intacct that comes with OCR scanning, so character recognition. Basically with this, a vendor can email a bill into the system. The system will grab that, it will scan that bill. So let's look at this one, for example, and it will put it in a draft state for somebody to review, but it will pre-populate a lot of the information based upon the character recognition from scanning that bill. So let's look at this one. So as you can see, I have the bill attachment right here, as well as the bill image over here to my right. So I can look at, the image that was emailed in, as well as how Intacct has populated that data. So as we can see, there's my invoice date of 11/2, and there's the date populated in Intacct according to the character recognition. There's the vendor, and here's the vendor in Intacct. Okay, now if I need to toggle those pay to or return to, I can do that as well. It also grabbed the invoice number and pre-populated my invoice number here. The due date, they got their dates kind of differently formatted. So it looks like this is day, month, and then year. So that actually did not pick that up correctly. But it looks like it took the terms from the vendor and then populated that for us. So that might be okay, or that might be something we have to adjust. Okay. And then, of course, we've got the coding of the bill down here. So it went ahead. There was 3 different items on here and some sales tax. Okay. So it coded it all to a certain location. It coded it all to repairs and maintenance, and it split each of those items up on the invoice. So obviously, again, if we need to adjust any of this, we can. If we need to split any of this up, we can. If we need to add additional coding, like for maybe our departments, okay, we could do that. Or providers, we could do that as well. So we can, of course, adjust or fill these things in as needed. So really with the OCR scanning, basically the hope is that the information that is presented on the invoice will at least pre-populate much of the data. And so we're not having to enter as much data on this. We might have to check a few things, maybe adjust a few things, maybe enter a few things. But for the most part, hopefully everything is pre-populated. And then we are just submitting that invoice. Okay, so now we can see that one is posted and the rest of mine are in draft. Obviously, if we just want to see the ones that we need to address, we can always filter this state right here to just draft. And then that's going to pull up all my draft ones that I need to take a look at. Okay. Now, as we've talked about as well, you can have bill approvals set up in the system. So you can see that some of these invoices are posted. We've talked about our draft ones, but some of them are in a state of submitted. So submitted means that they are waiting on approvals. So you can set up AP bill approvals in the system. The AP bill approvals will kind of land in this approved bills area for whoever the approver is. Now, the approver can also get an email, and that is an option for the approver because some people enjoy getting emails. Some people just have an overloaded email inbox, and so that is not their preference. So if they don't want an email, that is completely fine as well. They can set that in their preferences for each user. So somebody who approves might prefer to get emails, and another one who approves might not, and that's okay. They can both be different. This approved bills screen, though, is where you can always come into to see your approvals that are kind of in your queue. You can also put the screen on a dashboard. Okay, so if there's a dashboard that somebody frequents, or maybe when they log in, they land on a dashboard, it's probably smart to put, if they're in charge of approvals, to put this approval queue on their dashboard as well. Now, of course, if we want to go ahead and look at each one individually, we can click this view, and that's going to bring us into the actual full view of the AP bill. We can see the bill date, the due date, all of the snapshot type of information up here at the top. Of course, we can check, the coding, different things like that. We can see attachments if they're attached. And then from here, we can approve or decline individually. And you can always write notes, of course. You can also just grab them all at once to approve. Now, we hope everybody is at least looking at these, but if you've looked at them all and you're just ready to approve them all, you can go ahead and click approve and do that as well. Now, your decline buttons as well also have notes. So if I decline this one, it will decline that, but I can add notes if I need to on the decline as well. Now, your next step in the process is going to be to go ahead and decide how you are going to pay the bills. So once we've got vendors in, we've got bills in, we've approved bills if needed, now how do we actually pay these bills? I can also create filter sets with different objects in the system. So for example, if I want to take an object on the vendor record, such as payment priority, filter that for all my urgent pay vendors. I might name this filter urgent pay vendors, and then I could use that in my filter set. So as you can see, there's several ways to create customized filter sets that then you can apply in this pay bill screen to help control or consolidate the amount of bills that you're seeing on the screen. In a multi-entity environment, the screen can get potentially very heavy with the list of bills that you might see in the screen. So filter sets provide a great way to be able to filter down those bills for you. Now, when I have my filters included and I want to go on to going ahead and paying, my bills by certain methods, the available methods in Intacct are, of course, to produce a check, to record that something has been paid by a credit card, to record a record transfer, typically meaning a withdrawal from your bank, so ACH withdrawal or wire withdrawal or some other source of how a bill might have been paid outside of the system, cash, or ACH bank file. This ACH bank file right here is the ability for Intacct to generate the natural file that then you upload to your bank, and your bank cuts ACHs to your vendors. So in this example, we'll use the check method. We, of course, pick the bank that we would like to cut the checks from, select the payment date, and then, of course, select any bills that we want to pay. Now you can see here that there's some blue hyperlinks available on this page as well. So if I want to drill down into the actual bill, I can click that and it's going to open up a screen for me where I can see the bill from here. So I don't have to exit out or open up a separate screen. Of course, I can see all the line item details, any attachments, etc. You also have this line details area over here. So if you want to click the line details, you can see how many lines are in each bill. So this one just has 21 line for $25,000 and a credit of $500 available. But something like this one right here has several lines available and a credit of $45 available. And we can see right here that the 2 lines at the top are available to apply that credit against, but they're not available at the bottom 2 lines, and that's because of the entity. So the credit sits at this entity 100, so it's available to apply entity 100. Credit does not sit at entity 200. So of course I can decide which line I want to apply that credit against using the screen right here and save that. Now, of course, if I want to go ahead and mark these as paid by check, I can go ahead and do that. And that will kick those 3 out of my queue. Now, if I have a few that, let's say, they took ACH out of my bank, so I want to mark those, I can go ahead and say record transfer. We'll say that they took them out of this bank account, and I can mark those as paid. And then that will kick those out of my queue. Now, of course, if you are actually printing checks, then there is a second step to be able to print those checks. So that would be in my print checks area. So we're going to go ahead and toggle over to that screen. Now I'm going to pick the checking account we're looking at. And these are all of my checks. Now if I need to see checks that might have been created by somebody else, I can toggle this to all, and then I would see everybody's, checks that they have put into the queue. If I just need to look at mine, I can just toggle to my checks. Now, of course, we have quite a few checks here. You can decide different things, like if you want check stub details. So this would include the GL account, department, location on the actual check stub for yourself and for the vendors, potentially, if you would like to utilize that. If I want to go ahead and print all the checks, I can select that up there, or I can just print a few at a time as well. When I click those, I click this button that says print, and this is going to pull up a PDF for me. And this PDF, of course, would be attached to whatever printer that you would be printing to. This example right here has top check stock, but you can have top, middle, and bottom in some circumstances. And then, of course, it has stubs available as well. So I can see all the checks, of course. And if I want to have a printed signature, I can, and I can also have 2 signatures as well, if that is necessary. So once I have printed these to my printer, the second step over here is to confirm or void. So that's, of course, making sure that your check's printed correctly. How many times have we not put the check stock in the printer or printed them upside down or something like that? So if something like that happens, you can go ahead and click this void button and it will keep them in the queue to print again. But if everything printed appropriately, we'll hit confirm and that will actually post the payment. So now, of course, if we were to look at those bills in our bills listing, those bills are going to reflect in our paid status now, all of our paid bills. For accounts receivable in the healthcare industry, most customers are bringing in their revenue via journal entry. Many of our customers will use an outside billing system and go ahead and designate a special journal that then the revenue can be brought from the outside billing system into Sage Intacct via journal entry. When you look at this journal entry, you can see that there are the use of dimensions within the journal entry as well. So, of course, we can use the posting date, additional comments or attachments as well. We can, of course, use our GL account coding, whether that is revenue for private pay, public insurance, or other types of revenue that we might categorize. We can also use dimensions such as location to specify certain locations, departments if needed, provider if needed, and even we can code things down to the customer or payer record. Now, for things to be coded to our customer or payer record in Intacct, we will have to bring in customers into our existing customer record listing. Some clients will choose to just bring in major payers, such as these up here that you see, Aetna, Medicare, Medicaid, etc., versus actually bringing in individual people. You can bring in individual people if you are going to be using the AR module to build those people specifically, which we will look at in just a moment. When we have our customer records set up in Intacct, we then can use those customer or payer records to go ahead and indicate that breakout on the journal entry. If you'd like to automate the process of journal entries being recorded from your EMR system, you can also use a product such as EMR Connect by Bitcoin. EMR Connect integrates seamlessly with Sage Intacct, and all of your integration settings and data mappings are defined within your Sage Intacct environment through the EMR Connect application. From there, you can integrate files locally or from your SFTP site. The integration between EMR Connect and Sage Intacct will allow your EMR system to generate the appropriate transaction within Sage Intacct. This is an example here of a journal entry that was created from the client's EMR billing system into Sage Intacct with all the appropriate use of dimensions as needed, such as transaction and department. As you can see, there are multiple ways to get journal entries into Sage Intacct. You may also use your accounts receivable module for actual invoicing of customers if needed. For example, this individual right here, Riley Dawson, has a current balance of $62.02 in the system. If we look at our current listing of invoices, we should be able to identify invoices that are coded to Riley Dawson. We can see that there are certain invoices that have been posted, while others are not as paid. If we look at the actual coding of the invoice, again, we can use our dimensional references to identify things we might need to track. Our customer or payer is Riley Dawson, and our bill to and our ship to are going to Elena Lewis. Our invoice number has been populated, our terms are populated our due date, and we can add attachments to this invoice if necessary. We can see that this invoice has been coded to our private pay revenue in the total amount of $72.02. It's going to our billing and administration department to our location in Springfield. Again, if we have a provider that we'd like to indicate on this invoice, we could do that as well for dimensional tracking. When it comes time to go ahead and receive a payment against this invoice, we'll use the receive payment screen in Intacct. Go ahead and add a payment that we want to receive, and we are going to enter our invoices for Riley Dawson. I'm going to click Show Invoices here to see all invoices that are available, and at this moment, we just have the amount for $72.02 available. You can also see that we have a credit available to apply $32,000. That would give us a total outstanding amount of $62,002. In the header information above, you will want to indicate, of course, the amount received, whether you received the $72,002 or the $62,002. What bank account this also is going into, and that will give us a listing of our available bank accounts to choose from, the date received, the actual payment date, any attachments that we want to attach as well. Now you can see, because I put the amount of $62,002 in, we are going to go ahead and apply that credit $5,000 to make our payment amount $62,002. Once we go ahead and post this payment, we will be able to see that if we look back at our actual customers, that Riley Dawson's balance has actually come down to zero, because now all of those invoices that were outstanding have now been marked as paid. Thank you for taking the time today to learn about how different healthcare companies might record revenue in Sage Intacct. For additional questions, please reach out to your account executive.